Hey guys, is everything okay? We hope everyone is well and safe. Today we have a big announcement. The newest member of Soul Java organization team. Come here, Ron, because this night is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm here from Montreal, and I would like to bring you. I'm working a good talker, the Ken Fogel. I'm working here. I'm Brazilian, but I work here in Canada since January this year. I'm working Trust Tech Canada, and I'm here to create. In 2 weeks, we're gonna have the happy hour in the Soul Java, and for the first talk, I would like to bring a guy that work in the Dawson's College. He's going to talk about himself and the Java champion, Ken Fogel. Can you come here?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Let me tell you a little bit about myself so you understand where I'm coming from. I have been a teacher at a college here in Montreal called Dawson College it's actually 31 years. I teach in the computer science technology program. So, unlike a university where the focus is typically on study, theory, concept, uh, in Quebec, a technology program is all about hands-on. I sometimes describe what we do at Dawson as a 3-year boot camp. Our mandate from the government of Quebec is to train our students to be software developers, to be able to go out into the workplace and be productive on the first day. And that's what I've done for all of these years after a career in industry. And then I had the good fortune about 6 or 7 years ago to be invited to speak at Oracle's Java 1, now called Code 1. And being involved in that community, I started blogging more, started writing more, and I even decided to hold my own conference in Montreal. I wanted to bring a little of what I saw in San Francisco or other places I had the good fortune to speak at, so that my students could get that same feeling, that same excitement about being at a conference without the big expenses. I can't imagine what it costs to travel from Brazil, but I can tell you that from Montreal, 1 week in San Francisco with airfare and hotel and everything else usually runs over 3,000 Canadian dollars. Which of course is only $12 US, but you get the idea. Our money isn't worth as much as we'd like it to be. So I wanted to bring some of that to Montreal. So we're coming up to our 5th year. As part of that, I had the good fortune of being nominated to the Java Champions program because of my work, my writing. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. I'm OmniProf. Just look for my name, you'll find me somewhere. I tweet about irreverent things and make fun of people, and they make fun of me, and we have a good time. And we avoid talking about the current management of a particularly large country below Canada. Keep that out of the conversation. I'm, obsessed with programming. I'm always looking for new ways to, expand, to express to my students how to do things. And I have observed over the last little while that there is a trend away from Java, that the trend is moving, as I'll discuss in my presentation, towards JavaScript, towards Python. And I think that's not the right way to train the next generation of developers. And I think we all have a responsibility for it. I've used my platform as a Java champion to talk about it. I ran for the Java Community Process Executive Committee. I had a platform. There were 3 things I wanted to change in Java. I wanted to enhance its position in education. That's what I'm doing now. My second project, haven't started it yet, is to deal with documentation. I hate to say this, but I still miss my old C++ manuals. So maybe once I've solved education and world peace, I'll go on to solving documentation for Java. And then finally, something that is being addressed is making Java a first-tier language in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'll make a brief mention to a JSR, a project in Java to make that happen, finally. So I'm here today to talk to you about Java, the myths behind it, comparing it to Python, and hopefully convince you to go out there and talk to teachers, talk to schools who are moving towards good languages. Python and JavaScript are good languages, but I personally don't believe that these are the languages that a new developer needs to start with. So there's a little bit about myself. Shall I begin?
Yeah.
I'll hit that share button,
Sure.
and you're stuck with me. Okay, let's see what's happening. I'm just trying to figure out how to get the slides a little larger there. Ah, there we go. I know what I look like, so I don't have to see myself. So thank you all for coming. Oops, there we go. So we called this presentation Renewing Java in Education. Java has been subject to some really exciting enhancements. There are some, the architects behind the language, the people who are working on it day in and day out, are seriously focused on making the language not only more powerful, but also friendlier. And so that's what I want to talk about today. These enhancements dispel myths. There's all the stories we hear about Java, or Java is too difficult, Java is too hard, Java is too big. I don't think that's true. I still think that Java remains the best first language for everyone to start with. And as I've mentioned just a few moments ago, we'll take a little look at the comparison between Java and Python. So let's start with some of the negatives. Let's start with some of the things people like to knock Java about. The most classic one is the famous line, Java has a steep learning curve for a beginner. There's all kinds of strange and wonderful syntax we have to learn before we can create that amazing first program, Hello World. Well, my experience, especially working with people in industry, transferring to education, that generally the only people who think there's a steep learning curve are instructors who are learning the language for the first time. And it's the situation again of somebody learning a second language. Everything they learn is compared to what they did before. So don't look at Java as a steep learning curve. Trust me, Python's got a steep curve, so does JavaScript. The next famous downside to Java is that it's not suitable for lightweight, quick tasks. That Java is really better suited to those complex back-end systems. And there's no question that is what it's used for frequently. I know here in Montreal, every major financial institution has Java running the back end of their organization. So that's certainly where it is. But Java can handle those small, quick and dirty tasks. Well, we're going to take a look at something called single file source code. And I'll even talk briefly about what's called shebang execution, which makes Java as easy to run as any bash shell script on a Linux platform. Then, of course, there's what happened just a couple years ago when Oracle changed the licensing of Java. And so suddenly people started running around going, we're all going to pay, we're all going to pay. And of course, that's not true. I can't talk to why Oracle did what they did, but what they have effectively created is this huge open market of companies willing to support Java. And then Oracle's participation is to maintain a 100% open source version of Java. That is the version that their developers work on. And then the source code from that open JDK then becomes the basis of every other version of Java out there. So we still have that central aspect to managing the language, but now we have a competitive marketplace, right? Development on Java is done by a number of individuals, and it's all brought together first through OpenJDK and then the Java community process. I grabbed this little piece of text, and I realize some of you may not be as comfortable reading English, but this was from the Software Development Times. It's a magazine that's well thought of in North America. And it's also from about a year ago. I thought this was interesting. And the particular author of this, Christina, pulled out all the old excuses. Java's too verbose for beginners. To be able to write Hello World, you need to have knowledge of classes, static methods, and packages. She claimed that C is a bit easier, and then finishes by saying, gee, Python, this is just a one-liner. Well, you may not know this, but you can write one-line code in Java and execute it. We'll take a look at that. Here's the latest TOB index of popularity of languages. We can notice that this month Java is number 2. Last month it was number 1. For many years, it moves between 1 and 2. And then the following languages, C, Python. I noticed JavaScript has fallen a lot in this particular survey. They'll always be there, but Java remains in the top 2 year after year. Some other old myths here. One of my favorite is that Java is an old language. Java was introduced to the world in 1995. JavaScript was introduced at the end of that same year. But Python was introduced in 1991. Python is the old man language here. And Java was developed as a full stack language. From the first applets all the way to what we work with now in enterprise. This was always what the language was meant to be. It says there that more Java programmers than any other type of programmer in the world. You're always going to meet somebody who programs in Java. And the significance of that large body of developers is there's always someone you can turn to get help, who can mentor you in terms of user groups. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect we have the largest organization in the world of developers. And I've always found fascinating how developers love to share what they know. No real secrets when you're at a software conference. We know that Java derives its syntax from C. That's the grandfather. I guess we can say before C it was PL1, and then it was Fortran and COBOL, and on going back in time. But by having a syntax that's derived from C, as do so many other languages, learning Java makes it easier for you to move on to languages like JavaScript, C#, C++, even Python. And then finally, if you know Java, you're ready to start developing in Android. Although you may know that the current preferred language from Google is Kotlin. Kotlin is a language that runs on the Java virtual machine. And that makes it compatible with the whole family of Java libraries out there. So looking at instruction and looking at the very beginning, one tool that was finally delivered to us with JDK 9 was JShell. The idea behind JShell was to allow anyone working with Java to very quickly execute, test a particular command, a method, an entire class without the necessary or the usual overhead of compiling, packaging, and execution. It works very much like the very first language I ever played with, which was BASIC, beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code. Can't remember if I actually remembered what BASIC stands for. It is a friendly face to Java. So let me show you something. I'm going to switch to my editor. So I'm going to diminish the slides for a moment. And I want to look at this little block of code here that you can see. This is in my favorite editor, Notepad++. And you'll notice, first of all, that this is not a proper Java file. There is an import statement because I want to use the scanner. And what we have here is a Java method, but there's no class or any of that other decoration. So here we are. Let me clear my screen. Whoops. So if we want to use JShell, assuming that you have Java since Java 9 loaded on your machine, we just have to say JShell. Now we're assuming that you've set up the path properly and so on. So here we are, nice little command line. I can type things in. Oops. Nothing special. I can do a system .out .println. This is the boring part, so I won't do this for too much longer. X, oops. Oh, and of course I still can't spell. Let's put in that L. There we go. There's the 4. Well, that's one way to do that. But a more interesting way, whoops, my language has changed. There we go. Slash, nope. There you go. Living in Quebec, I have to be able to quickly switch my keyboard from French to English. So occasionally we get unusual symbols showing up. If I say edit. So this will open up. You can see this. I'm going to move this over to the screen. There we go. You see this little swing-based editor. Unfortunately, I can't make the text here any larger. I'm going to cancel. Whoops, I'm sorry. Let's do this one more time. There we go. So let me just erase what's in here. Now, if I go to my editor and I simply copy this code, I could have typed it in line for line, or I can just paste it into this editor. And with JShell, by the way, you can use any editor that you'd like. Now, I'm going to accept it and exit. If we go back to JShell and I do list, there is the code that I had. Oops, I left that int x and that system.out.println. So I'm going to reset again. Good. Let's make sure it's empty. It is. Let's call up edit. I'm going to paste my code back in here. Whoops. There we go. Accept. Oh, forgot to exit. Of course, we can see it's decided to act up on me and freeze a bit here. But luckily, oh, maybe not. Let's close this. There we go. So, never let a machine get the better of me. Let's move this to where you can all see it. Great. As embarrassing as it is sometimes when things don't work for me, you can imagine how it is for me over here as things start failing. Okay, let's grab this again. And we're going to accept. Now we can exit. You can see the message that it created the method. If I go ahead and list it, there it is. And to run this, remember, this is just a method. All I have to do is call the method. Heck, I don't even need this semicolon. And now it's going to ask me, how much do I want to borrow? What's my interest rate? And for what period? And there we go. I'd be paying $94 a month. So here I'm able in JShell to either play on a line-by-line basis. I can just write methods. I can exercise the language easily in this particular environment. Let's visit the slides for a moment. So we just talked about that. So the next item is the launch single file source code programs. For me, at least as a teacher, as someone who is trying to encourage people to use Java and having to deal with the arguments about other languages, the single file source code to me is one of the most significant features. I'm waiting for local threads. That'll probably be more exciting. But for now, single file source code is what's important because it eliminates the classic two-step, the Java C for the compiler, the Java to execute it. Oh, well, wait a minute. We have to put it into a jar file. And suddenly you begin to see how Java develops that reputation of being difficult, awkward. So let's take a look at a quick example here. So I'm going to go back to my editor. And let's take a look at, well, actually, let's take a look at that same program now written in proper Java. So I'd argue about all that code in main. Still, we'll use this as a first point. So I can write this. I can use any simple editor and write it. I'm going to copy this down here because this will save me or save you the pain of watching me type. Now, let's just exit JShell because this is all done from the command line. So if I just say Java calculator 01, and when I press enter, the program executes. There's none of the intermediate steps. And just to make sure it is the exact same information, there's my $94.36. I have a more complex version of this program, the number 3. This has set it up in a proper class, private methods, and heck, I've even thrown in the brand new record. I don't know if any of you have been voting for the JDK, favorite feature. I know it came down to the Java monitoring system Rocket versus record. I haven't seen who's won yet, but I'd still vote for record. So here we have the same code. I'm going to grab the line here. Now there's a little extra in that line. It's asking about source 14. The record is a preview feature of Java 14. Enable preview. Normally, preview features are not directly available when you execute Java code. You need this additional switch. So with that saved, let's go back to my command line. Now, I have to tell you, you're going to be underwhelmed because it's going to work exactly the same way as it's worked up until now. Again, $5,000 at 5% for 60 months. And we get the same answer. So all the arguments that Java requires a complex IDE to get anything done, I don't think is valid any longer. As long as somebody can do a little typing, I'm saying that this becomes suitable for children as young as 10 or 11. You know, kids are getting onto keyboards sooner. Let's go back to the slides. This is something I have to admit I haven't had a chance to play with myself because I don't have a Linux box, and I've updated machines lately. But here is a technique that part of the single file launch that actually allows you to include the command line to execute your code in the script. And this particular article that this came from even makes a point of saving the file with an entirely different name from the class. But this is the magic. The pound symbol or the octothorpe followed by the bang, hence the shebang. If this file in a Unix system is made executable, then you can just run it by name. Or as it points out, if it's on the path, you can just run the name directly. You don't need the dash and the slash. Java can do those quick and dirty tasks. They can allow you to write, as long as you don't mind a single file, really complex programs if you want, and just call them from the command line. Java can do so much more than what we expect. Recently, we had the introduction of var. This went a long way to dealing with that one famous myth that Java is verbose. And verbose in English means we have to say a lot to get the meaning across. So as we can see in the first example, there's my classic way to display or to instantiate an object. But notice the repetition. I had to say the class name on both sides. With var, we let the compiler do some of the work for us. Even more interesting is the fact that in using this particular type of syntax, we are required to instantiate the object right away. We can't say var am and then we'll get around to filling it in later, which is something we can do with the first syntax. I can declare my class M, then forget about it, and then start trying to use it, and then we all get our most favorite error, the null pointer exception. And of course, we all remember Java class number 1, where an instructor stood in front of us, or the book we were reading said on the first page, there are no pointers in Java. And then the very first error we typically see is the null pointer exception. With the var syntax, we have to instantiate objects right away. Null pointer exceptions diminish, and hopefully one day we'll get rid of them completely with the next big enhancement. Next are text blocks. We know how difficult it is to include in our code formatted text. And here's where the architects at Java, recognizing that this was a feature found in most other languages. Java was a little late to the ball. So here, let's take a look at this. Here's what I call old school concatenation, right? When you don't want that line to be a single line going off the right side of your screen, you start breaking it up. And while some IDEs do make it easier, it would be so much friendlier if we could do this without changing the layout of the text. And so here is exactly the same little piece of HTML using what I call the new school text block. And you can see the 3 marks at the top, 3 marks at the bottom, the quotation marks. Java's smart enough to look at the leftmost piece of text, which would be the tag HTML, and that becomes the left margin. So space before HTML is removed. Now we can copy and paste text blocks that must be preserved right into our Java code. And when we do our system.out.println or however else we plan to use it, it will be exactly as we had it in our code. Whoops, went too far. Sorry, jumping around a bit here. I'm going to back up one more. There we go. So I'm not lost. Here we go. Then there's the switch. So I'm going to tell you something. Maybe I shouldn't admit this. Probably one of my most favorite languages has been Visual Basic. And not the new .NET crap. Nah. That's not for me. I'm an old Visual Basic 6 developer. I made a fair amount of money writing code in Visual Basic 6. And one of its interesting features was the switch. As it wasn't beholden to a whole lineage of C, the switch in Visual Basic still far exceeds the switch I've seen in any other language. A case can be almost any type of comparison that you want. Java inherited the C switch, which C++ inherited, and so that came to us with its need for a break, a particularly awkward block to create. Now we have a switch that will make sense to a modern student, makes sense to a modern developer, a switch that can eliminate required code such as the break. So here's an example of exactly the same code, one written on the left, what I will call the pre-new switch, and on the right, the new switch version. You can see how we needed a break for every case. I've left out a default. I probably should have one in case there's a 5th direction I don't know about. But take a look at the new version. Think of you having to stand in front of a class, whether they're elementary school students or adult learners, and trying to tell them how we always need a break because as soon as a switch is true, all the rest of the switches go true. My understanding is it's that way because of some hardware issue with x86 architecture. It didn't have to be that way. Somebody took a shortcut. Well, we're no longer subject to that. Here we're seeing a switch as it's presented in an expression, which means the output of the switch is assigned to a variable. We use the new arrow operator. That arrow operator replaces the colon, and that's how the new switch knows we don't need a break at every line because whichever one is true, that's it. We're leaving once it's true after we've assigned that value to the variable we're interested in. Then there's records. We saw one briefly. We'll take a slightly closer look at it when we compare Python to Java. You may have heard of a project called, I think it's Lombok. This is an add-in to Java that handles the creation of setters and getters. And the other, boilerplate is the English term. Boilerplate is something that gets used over and over again that is the same. So we'd have Lombok to do that. But there were still issues. Not everything was compatible. So if we were writing a data object, or I usually call them a Java bean because they follow that specification, We know we need constructors, some for initializing, some for copying, some for default. We need setters and getters and equals and hash code and to string. And gee, I left out the comparable interface. So we need a to compare, and it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. And if you want one area where Java gets a bad rap, it's right here. When you decide to build a data object, and you have all this, I call it decoration. So to the rescue is the immutable record. Immutability, the fact that we cannot change the state of something, rather we have to create a new object with new state, has been recognized as a great way to eliminate potential problems, especially in large systems. But trying to convince developers to make everything final and so on and so forth, there's still a lot of resistance. We all want to have complete control. We want our code to be able to change anything. And that ability to change anything, anytime, anywhere, in any language poses a potential problem. The record as a tool, not a replacement, but as a tool, deals with that. It is immutable. We cannot change its state. That means it must be initialized through the constructor. That's important. It encourages this concept of immutability, even introduces its own specialized constructor called the compact constructor, which allows you to validate fields in your particular record. This is still really new. As I mentioned earlier, it's in the final round for best new feature of Java. I think it's going to become more and more important as we go forward, and will make Java easier because it eliminates some of the things people new to the language forget to do. So looking at a new record, we can see here that the elements are declared in the what we would normally consider the constructor parameters, but in a record, we list the variables. If you look at my example shortly for Java, you'll see that the record actually doesn't have anything else but that first line. That's really all we need. We will have an object that's going to have a initializing constructor. In other words, you get a constructor with every field, and it will assign that value to everything we see there under person. So you get that for free. You get hash code, you get equals, you get to string. We don't have the setter, we don't have a setter at all. So the setter is gone. As for getters, so that we understand that this is not a traditional Java bean type object, we use the name of the object. So if I were to want to change age, I don't have a read age, I don't have a get age, I just say age, and I can access it. Reduce the amount of code, simplify things. When I teach about beans and data objects, I describe this as these are the boxes you're going to pack everything in. And especially right now, as we all depend on Amazon or other delivery services, we're very comfortable with boxes. So what's pushing Java aside? Why is Java losing the shine it once had? Well, two languages have contributed to this. And again, let me say that I'm not holding these languages up as inferior or poor or bad. Rather, I look at these languages as languages we all need to know, but not the language where we should be starting our education as developers. But why are they popular? Well, in JavaScript, well, there's pretty much nothing to download. Every school in a high school and a college, if you've got a browser, you've pretty much got it. There are a whole range of online programming environments, and this has become very popular. It's popular in the world of Python as well. That means that we don't have to worry about installing complex IDEs or having to download numerous things. It's amazing all the things that we're expected to be able to do on our computer. We're expected to play games like Call of Duty, be able to manage dozens of fellow combatants fighting strange enemies. And then you tell that same person, well, we need you to download the JDK, and they go, oh, that's going too far. I just want to wave my hand and have things happen. It's not onerous to set up a Java environment. It's usually just 2 downloads, Java, and if you're into an IDE, and you don't need one, but if you are, the IDE, and you're set to go. Then there's Python. Python, and we've already seen it's been around longer than Java. It has become incredibly popular in 2 areas. One is big data, and the other is in either, they go together, artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'm going to say something, and if anyone is insulted, I apologize. I don't mean to be insulting. But for me, Python has been the language that has been preferred by data scientists, anyone who needs to write code to get an answer, but who doesn't want to learn how to write code. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just that once you solved your problem, once you get your answer, I think it's time to build something a little more solid, a little more robust in terms of production. And that's where I think Python may not be the best choice. But again, it's easy to put into school computers. It's easy for people to get on their machines. And the myth that somehow or other it's easier to code, well, that's what we're going to look at now. One thing about Python, and I claim it's Python, but it's happened in a lot of other languages. And, as I'm looking at it now, I suddenly realized that the first design pattern I probably used when I got my Apple II Plus computer and turned it on and fired up Bill Gates's new present AppleSoft Basic, that you coded in what's called the stream of consciousness style. As you think of things, you add code, right? There's no structure. There's no anything. I need some input. Let's ask for some input. I need some output. Let's do some output. I need some processing. Let's do some processing. Methods, functions, procedures, classes, nah. Right? As I think of it, it's going to come out. And if at the very end I get the right answer, well, then I'm done. I like to joke with people who argue that the first step is to make it work, and the next step is to make it work well or make it organized. My understanding is in most companies, once you tell the boss it's working, they're not going to say, okay, now take 2 or 3 days to refactor it so that it's code that we can reliably evolve and do maintenance on as it goes into production for years. I don't think you get that message too often from employers. You want a language that encourages you to write responsibly. I think Java does that. I have some doubts about Python and JavaScript. So over the next few slides, let's look at a few Python things. Now, you've seen this program. I've run it a couple times. I asked for an amount of money, annual percentage rate, length of it. And by working with the same project, we're going to look at it, I guess best way to describe it is unstructured and then as an object-oriented solution. And we'll take a look at the differences between the two in Java and in Python. So here's our basic Python program. And remember, Python's well known for just writing and having things happen. Python follows what I consider an old basic approach, and that is the use of an input statement that does both the prompt and waits for user input. We can see a calculation that dividing the interest by 12, coming up with the result, printing the result. Notice, of course, that Python is a language that types at runtime. So decisions as to what loan and interest and term are going to occur at the point of usage. Is something a number? Is something a string? And although there's something to be said for not having to worry about what a type is, again, as systems get more complex, this becomes a more serious issue. So let's look at this as we would write it, and I think I've written it as small as I can in Java. So here we go. Yes, it's bigger. And of course, it's bigger because every prompt and input requires 2 lines. I'm actually just beginning the process of talking to people to saying, why can't we add another method to scanner, right? Scanner and keyboard input is really meant for, the initial phases of learning. We know that all interaction with a user is always in 2 parts. Show them a prompt, put up a button, show them a control, and then wait for the event associated with input. So the fact that we have to express that in 2 parts, even here on a command line, sets us up better for more complex systems. But if we were to remove that extra line, well, in reality, I think this version is only 2 or 3 lines longer, and that's probably attributed to the 2 opening braces all by themselves. Let's take a look at exactly the same problem, but done as a class in Python as well as Java. Really, all I've done is I have divided up the problem into different steps. There's the input, the process, the output. I'm not quite sure how languages are taught in general in many universities, but I know that was how I started learning it when the mainframe was there, that everything was input, process, and output. What small systems have done has removed the timing. We don't know when somebody's going to input. We don't know when they're going to output. We don't know when we're going to process. But regardless, everything we write works this way. And in this object-oriented approach, we see the different components, and then we instantiate our object with worker equals, and then we call effectively the main or whatever method we want for that. We move this to Java. Again, yes, it's longer, but again, not as much as you'd think. Pull out all these closing braces, which, by the way, I think makes it breathe a lot better. One of the things, I'm going to back up for a moment. One of the things that Python has is a type of structure you can see here. Loan interest term equals input data. This is a tuple. This is an immutable object that it's kind of cool because it figures out what are its elements based on what you assign to it. So we don't have anything quite as cool as that, but the record does work this way. We know what we're expecting, in this case, 3 doubles. So we can now take the information we want and instantiate this loan object. Oops, sorry about that. Didn't realize when I click it would move. So yes, it's longer. It's clearer. I know people who have grown fond of typeless languages go, well, it's obvious. Nothing is obvious, especially when, as I tell my own students, in your first job, you're going to be hired to do maintenance on other people's code. And then eventually you'll start generating new code for the company, and then you'll quit to get a better job. And the cycle starts over again. You want to make sure that your code can be understood and read by anyone. And I think Java does that better than most languages. I mentioned earlier that I had an interest in encouraging the use of Java in artificial intelligence, in machine learning. And the JCP recently had the good fortune of voting for the continuation of work on this particular JSR 381, Java service request. And I saw a presentation on how this worked, and it was really cool. If we think of how JDBC works, right? We have a standard interface to hundreds of different databases. Visrec JSR 381, which is focusing on just one corner of machine learning, and that is visual recognition. It's built using a standard API into which you could plug one of a number of different engines. And so you see the mention here of Amazon's Deep Java library. What really got me excited about this was it became apparent to me that with probably 2 or 3 dozen lines of code, if that many, you could write something, train it with an image, and then start asking it, is this a bird? Is this a cat? Is this my mother? Is this my dog? All of these amazing libraries are out there. They're all coming to Java. It's time to get involved. The Java virtual machine. I can remember years ago going to a presentation from Microsoft telling us how .NET was the future, that there was .COBOL, .Fortran. I mean, every language I'd ever heard of in the 2000s had a .NET flavor. Whereas they would point to Java and go, well, Java, all you've got is Java. What good is that? Well, of course, things have changed dramatically. While there still are a number of .NET languages, let's be honest, it's C# or VB#. Those are pretty much the primary languages. But we come over to our Java world, and suddenly there's a whole family of languages. Some trying to simplify Java, some expanding it. And what's exciting about almost all of them is they are compatible with the Java libraries. So that in Kotlin, I can use JavaFX. If I'm really hot for Python, there's something called Jython. Though I have to admit, I did some research and it's still Python 2. The work on Python 3 seems to have slowed to a crawl. So people will say to you, okay, so I'm going to go to this trouble. I'm going to learn Java. I believe you. This is the language to learn. What kind of jobs are there? Well, as I said at the beginning, my students have found themselves extremely successful in terms of who's using Java. I mentioned financial institutions, Twitter, LinkedIn, Amazon. I have students who work at Amazon. I have students who work at Microsoft, or they're not students anymore. They graduated. So they're working in a range of areas. I don't want to ignore the fact that your success in the industry is a function of how well you code. Nobody's going to look at somebody looking for a job and going, oh, you know Java? That's all I need to know. Come on in. You're just what we're looking for. Still got to be able to code. But as I've been trying to say all through this presentation, you want to start learning it with Java. That Java is the best language to learn to prepare you to work with any language during your career. It's the best language from a teacher's point of view if you really want to explain the software process to a student. Explain it simply, explain it in its complexity. Whatever way, whatever the student needs at the time. But definitely, Java is the way to go. So, what do I hope after you've seen this? I'm not really here to convince you to all learn Java. You already all learned Java. I'm hoping, whether it's in casual conversations or in connections you may have with schools, that you want to encourage anyone with an interest in writing software to consider Java as the language they want to start with. And to do that, I have some things that you can consider. Encourage students to join your Java users group. whether it's university or even what we call high school or secondary school. Encourage faculty in the computer science programs to join your Java user group. I went into teaching after working for a little over 10 years in the industry. Not very long, but I had the opportunity to get into education. I decided to make that move. And so initially I was really connected with what's happening in the industry. But, after about 10 years, things have changed. I was hired to teach Pascal, and then I led the department's transfer to Java from, I said I was hired to teach Pascal. The main language when I was hired was COBOL. And so we moved to Java. But then as a teacher, you're away from the industry. You want to encourage faculty, anyone who's teaching computer science at any level, to come to a jug, find out what's happening. I hate to use this phrase in English, the real world, but what's happening in the job market? What does it mean to be a programmer in 2020? Reach out to student associations. Consider having a jug meeting on campus. Provide resources for teachers. We all go, well, I'll just look it up on Google, and you Google something, and especially in comp sci, there's 10,000 answers for everything. Provide that support. Hold special sessions for teachers, professors. Get involved in education, run Java hackathons for students. And always remember that those young people, whether, it's high school, college, university, one day they're going to be at the next desk, or they're going to be in another square in your Zoom meeting. So I've showed you a bit of code, and you can find that code at this particular GitHub location. You'll also find this slide presentation there as well. Feel free to use it if you'd like to present to a group and encourage them to use Java. Here's a few of the things we found here. Here's the TOB index and the Software Times reference. Here's an excellent article about why Python shouldn't be the first language somebody learns. An article on the best languages to learn, and a little bit more on the visual recognition API that I thought you'd all find really cool. So, thank you all for having me. I'm going to stop sharing now. There we go. Thank you all for having me. And if there are any questions or anything else, you can always find me online somewhere, and I always love to talk. Thanks.
We're back. We have some couple questions. Bruno, I did some questions. I would like that you put in the video to Ken. Choose some couple questions. There are a bunch of questions over here, Ken.
Okay, I just found that I was looking at private chat, so that's why I saw nothing.
Yes, live comments.
Yeah.
He's going to put in the...
Okay.
The first one is, how and when was born the main idea for this program, Java in Education?
Okay, so when I started teaching, as I said, I was first hired to teach Pascal, and then I taught C, and then I taught C++, and then Java came. So we're talking about the late 90s. And what I saw was that, at least Sun back then, were very aggressive in the education market. They really wanted to promote Java. And, from my experience, if you programmed in C or C++, well, how did you do threads? How did you do GUIs? You'd have to pick other libraries. There were no standards. And then suddenly here is this beautiful language called Java that had all of that built in, and it caught on very quickly. Universities, colleges dropped C from their CS1 course and went to Java because there were so many more things they could do. I suspect what happened next was that teachers, promoters of languages started looking for the easiest solution. I have a number of other things to do. I have to teach a course in CS1, Computer Science 1. I'm a high school teacher. I was trained in the social sciences, and my workload today is teaching a comp sci course. What am I going to find? There's a lot less corporate promotion of Java in education. And so people started looking around, and whether it was JavaScript or Python, these all came with a reputation of we're easier. No, we're not. We're just different. And if anything, that easiness is misleading in terms of what it takes to develop modern software. So as a teacher, we had pressures over, we should, diminish Java. We should be teaching Python or something else. And working with our teachers who do our job placement, our internship, it was very clear to us that at least in our marketplace in Montreal, companies wanted Java-trained developers. Even if they didn't want them to write Java, they wanted Java-trained developers. It's like we teach, now it's Jakarta. And people will say to me, well, why don't you teach Spring? And I go, Spring's a great framework, but trust me, if you don't know what Jakarta or Java EE is, then Spring is just another black box that you'll never understand. And I love hearing comments from my students who go, sir, I got this internship. It's all Spring. It took me 2 days to figure it out because I understand how enterprise coding works from EE. That's when I saw Java's strength, and I saw a hole I wanted to fill, and that is to promote Java in education.
Very great, Ken.
There's another question. What kind of projects do you use to build in the class as practice with students?
So right now, I teach primarily the project courses. So these are the courses in the third year. So the students have had 2 years of what I would call academic training in programming, solving the usual kind of silly little problems. And then they come to the project courses. So for instance, last year, my students wrote Twitter clients. We used JavaFX. We used a really good library, Twitter4j, from a developer in Japan who now, he did work for Twitter for a while. He doesn't anymore. I actually met him at Code One last year. And the idea is to, gain experience in user interfaces. They have to store stuff in databases. There's even an email requirement. And they do this in phases. They do presentations, and they work from a specification document. I think I have a 12-page specification for that. And I have some other projects, and I'm more than happy to share any of them. In our final semester, the term that just finished, they do an e-commerce system. I think what's important here is, regardless of what the project is, it has to be real. It has to do something meaningful, and it has to have a certain level of complexity. So just having a program where you say, okay, write me a program that calculates the sales tax. Write me a program that calculates the shipping costs. Maybe a first level course may want to do it. But if you really want to understand the language, you have to develop a system. And so that's the type of work that I give to my students. And those rare occasions where I teach an introductory level, and I do this at a university, not at a college, I'm dealing with adults, people who are coming back to school for retraining, not for an undergraduate degree. Again, here's where, in their first web course, they're writing individually small e-commerce systems, because these are the real things they see every day. And I think that encourages them, makes them excited about what they're doing.
Okay, I have another question. How does the Jukes can work to help in this program?
Well, I think here it's a matter of what connections each member of the JUG has with the education sector. It can be as simple as maybe you have kids in school, or you have a friend, a neighbor, a spouse who works in computer science. We see a lot of, and I said this before, a lot of individuals who need to write code but don't want to learn how to write code. And that wasn't always the case. If you had to do anything, you had to learn how to code. But languages like Python, JavaScript, and others, and this is, again, not to knock them, they can let you just get down and with almost no training start churning stuff out. Well, contend you could probably do that with any language. But as members of the JUG, you have to, I think, get the word out there. You know, Java programmers love to share. There's a community waiting for students to get involved in. And that if you're training someone to be a software developer, if you're saying to an even younger student, let me give you a sense of what being a programmer is, then I think Java is excellent, right? You can write meaningful things in just a few hundred lines of code. It doesn't have to be a 200 class, 10 million line monster. But I think the people in academia and schools have to be getting the feedback from you as JUG members that the best opportunities for employment are going to be with a Java background first. Not necessarily that that's all you're going to code. That's ridiculous. But Java is where you want to start.
We're gonna have we have a couple of minutes more. I'm gonna have 2 more questions for Ken. Bruno's gonna put over here.
I don't see a count. How many people are actually?
Actually, right now in the end, we have. I'm seeing it on the YouTube. It's like 21
Cool.
people online. Let's go.
Run about 50 participants. Okay.
Oh, 50. Oh, yeah, because it's running from 3 different YouTube accounts.
Okay.
Ah, yeah, I forgot. Because I'm connected just to one.
That's okay. I will admit something. I have the rare distinction, and I've been told I'm not the only one, but I have the rare distinction of going to San Francisco, having a session scheduled, showing up at my appointed time, and no one came.
Really?
Yes. And I remember after about 15 minutes, I said to the AV technician it was time to leave. And the AV technician, a sweet young woman, comes up to me, puts her arm around me and says, there's a marijuana store across the street.
Oh, there's a question.
I said, thank you, but no thank you. I'm a big boy. I can deal with this.
There's a question that's from the JUG in the north of Brazil. It's a JUG leader. Why should we advocate? Antonio Lazar did this question about Java.
Well, there's 2 issues. One is, I hope you are advocating Java because it is a language you enjoy coding in. If it's a language you have to, well, it doesn't matter what. Anything you have to do is generally less enjoyable than something you want to do. So if you really enjoy Java, and like myself, have seen all these, myths, all these stories about, Java's not good for this, Java's not good for that, and watched, family members, friends, go into university and come out and go, oh, I know Python. And, that's great. But as I've said, would you hire a Java developer to work in a Python shop? Or would you hire a Python developer to work in a Java shop? I don't need an answer. I know how I would think. And I think we've got to get that message out.
Your presentation is successful. There's a guy, let's just download your presentation. Everybody loves it.
Great. My pleasure.
That's amazing. Everybody's interesting. I think that he told that the presentation is in his GitHub, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So if you go GitHub Omniprof, OMNIPROF, and you put an ad in front of it, that's also my Twitter handle and so on. Yeah, you can find the slides, you can find all the sample code. It's not a lot there, and keep in mind that this presentation was designed specifically to allow Jugs to use the presentation. I don't have to be there or anything. It's a matter of presenting it yourself, adding your own experiences to it, change the slides, translate it into Portuguese, make it relevant for wherever you are.
That's great. That's great.
That's great.
I would like to say thanks for your time, Ken.
It's been my pleasure.
We are almost neighbors, and I would like to have a beer with you when you can, because we need to meet each other in person right now. That everything is open right now.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna call you to schedule an appointment to a beer.
and to everyone who's come to listen to me, thank you. I'm as I've said, I'm always open to questions. You can always find me somewhere, it's been great to be able to talk to you down there.
Okay, we have 50 people, and probably we're gonna have more people watching because it's gonna be recorded. And people sometimes save to. I have some friends that told me, "Oh, I'm having some dinner. I'm going to watch later." That's an amazing opportunity.
If you have members who have trouble falling asleep, they can just watch me, and about 5 or 6 minutes in, they'll be fast asleep. I know that.
That's amazing presentation. I really appreciate that. For me, it's it was very, very good presentation, like a professor, 30 years experience talking. It's like it's amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bruno, right, for your help. Bruno helped me to do everything happens as well. Okay.
Ken, your talk was great. I learned a lot of for you tonight. Thank you. Ron, congratulations for recruitment. Welcome to the team of Java organization, right?
Yeah. Ken, today I'm becoming the JUG member officially in Brazil.
Ooh. Long distance too, yeah.
Yeah. All right. It's right now it's every single line.
Well, this is it. It doesn't matter where you live anymore.
Yeah.
Though I'm bummed out. I was supposed to be in Singapore in April. That didn't happen. I was really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And now we're gonna have another talk in 10 minutes with Julio. He's talking in Portuguese about the Java career. We put Java education, Java career together. It's a good subject to put together.
Definitely. So I'll leave you guys then.
Thank you.
To everyone who's here, thank you so much for sticking around and listening to me. As I said, I'm always out there, more than happy to answer any questions. And I'll say good night. Oops.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Good night. Bye.
Good night. Bye.